So it's the weekend again. Hope you guys are having a good one so far, but that also means it's time for our weekly Warzone loadouts. We're a day late here on this as opposed to our normal Friday upload with this. League week was so insane that it messed up my entire content schedule this week, but alas, we're here today and we're talking about the fastest TTK weapons that you should be using to absolutely fry, and I mean fry, your enemies in either Rebirth or Caldera. As we go along, drop your thoughts below. Are you liking any of these weapon builds that we'll be seeing? Any builds that, even if they're not in the top 10 statistically speaking, that you're having a blast with? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts below. But if you enjoy the video, you find it at all insightful, you find it helpful in any way, drop a like on the video if you'd be so kind. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all things Warzone loadouts, tips, tricks, updates, and information as it happens. And here pretty soon, a ton of Modern Warfare 2 content right around the corner. If you're interested in any of that, you'd like to stay up to date with all of it, I'd love to have you in the community. And finally, my friends over at G Fuel have bumped up code ESPRESSO to 30% off your entire order. Once again here, quick turnaround. So if you guys want to check anything out in regards to a restock, trying something out for the very first time, now is as best a time as any, and we won't see a 30% off discount with my code until next month sometime. But that said, if you guys are interested, check the link in the description below. I'd recommend Hype Sauce, Pink Drip, the new Morbius Nectarine flavor, Starfruit, and Strawberry Banana. Can't go wrong with any of those. That said, let's jump into it. Let's start out with a sort of rule set here, some parameters for how this video is going to go. Number one, we're going to be breaking this down into two separate categories. 5 of the statistically best weapons, but also 5 of the situationally best TTK weapons, because honestly, 95% of the time, especially on Caldera, the statistically best weapons are not even remotely viable, either because of damage drop-offs for ranges, bulkiness, lack of ammo, how quickly you burn through it with the rapid fire attachments. You're just going to be putting yourself in jeopardy. Number 2, we're talking realistic TTKs in this video with data points situated around chest shot locations. You can absolutely see faster TTKs for all of these weapons if you change the plot points to include only headshots and the multipliers that come along with that, but that'd be incredibly misleading because chances are you'll miss 1 or 2 shots at least of the 3 to 5 headshots necessary for most of these weapons. You won't be hitting every single one because of either recoil, returning fire and flinch, or a whole host of other variables that could knock you slightly off course with your aim. Number 3, for the sense of thoroughly covering bases, will include TTK for both Caldera and Rebirth. Hopefully with Season 4 we can have that consistent baseline, but right now there's a 50 HP differential between Rebirth and Caldera. Number 4, statistics today are from True Game Data's site. Tony's a great dude who puts an absurd amount of time into making these tools like this, so if you guys want to check out his site, build your own fastest TTK weapons, highest damage builds, you name it, highly recommend checking it out. And number 5, this video is predominantly based around stats. Hard statistics, so I apologize, we're going to be bouncing a ton of numbers your way, and it may sound droning, but when you want the proven best, that's the cost of business. That said, let's start out with the statistically best weapons, though they may not be the best choices. The AS-44 on Caldera with 300 HP, you can end up getting a fastest TTK build of 539 milliseconds, outwards of 583 milliseconds at 23.8 meters. But beware, because you'll see, as with a few other weapons, the damage drop-off is pretty severe, and it cuts that TTK down quite a bit. Not as much as other weapons, but at 23.8 meters, you can either get 538 milliseconds or 673, if you're not entirely accurate. On Rebirth, with that 50 HP decrease by comparison, you can get 449 milliseconds, outwards of 493 milliseconds at 23.8 meters. So you're gonna fry, but do note that damage drop-off. For this build, I'd recommend the recoil booster, Empress Falcon Barrel, the Slate Reflector, the Skeletal Stock, the 1941 Hand Stop, the 7.62 Gorenko 50-round magazine, Polymer Grip, Lengthened, Sleight of Hand, and Fully Loaded. You're maximizing this out for absolute rapid fire, and you'll definitely notice it whenever you use it. Now next is the AS Val, a weapon from Modern Warfare that still has stood the test of time as being one of the fastest TTK weapons since its introduction. On Caldera with 300 HP, you can get a fastest potential TTK of 610 milliseconds with a gradual decrease to 704 milliseconds at 40.3 meters, which is surprisingly consistent that it's that fast a TTK at that long. On Rebirth, because there is that differential of 50 HP, it actually is a weapon that could actually be relatively viable. For this, you can end up getting a fastest TTK of 475 milliseconds to a drop-off of 568 at that 40.3 meter range. For this, I'd recommend the OSA Barrel, Ranger or Merc foregrip, the 30-round magazine, the Skeletal Stock, and the Stippled Grip Tape. After that, we're going to be jumping over to one that may seem a little bit awkward here for you, but it's the Itra Burst. The Itra Burst, of course, you can kit this out for rapid fire, but it's still a burst weapon fundamentally, so you're going to have to be conscious of that tapping of your trigger, but you can absolutely shred with people up close and personal. For this, on Caldera, the fastest TTK you can end up achieving is 639 milliseconds with a gradual decrease outwards of 28.8 meters, where you'll be met with the best case of 692 milliseconds. On Rebirth, the fastest TTK you can get is 497 milliseconds with a gradual gradual drop off to 550 milliseconds. So honestly, in Rebirth, it's not half bad, but once you get out to range, you'll notice a little bit of a difference there with that. For this, I'd recommend the recoil booster, the rapid barrel, the slate reflector, the body skeletal stock, the pistol grip for a little bit of that sprint to fire speed. The 36 round 303 rounds is what's going to make this. Lengthened as your ammo type, the fabric grip, vital, and fully loaded. Now, next we have the PPSH, which on Caldera is pretty solid actually, up close and personal. Same with Rebirth. I mean, with 300 HP, you can end up getting 640 milliseconds as your fastest TTK, but that drops fast. The first damage drop off is only at 8.8 meters, where you could have a 665 millisecond TTK or a 756 millisecond TTK, depending on where your shots land. But then it gets worse, because just 3 meters later, at 11.2 meters, you could have a TTK of 763 milliseconds or 809 milliseconds, which is slower than a lot of rifles. So outside of close range, you're kind of screwed. On Rebirth, it's kind of the same story here, just quicker TTKs, 503 milliseconds within the first 8 meters. Then you can drop it down to a 619 millisecond at 8.8, and then 672 at 11.2. For this, though, if you're interested in running it, I'd recommend the recoil booster, which normally people with the hipfire build will run that oil can suppressor, but you want to boost that fire rate for the fastest TTK with this, so the recoil booster is the better option there. The Kovalevskaya 230 millimeter barrel, the slate reflector, removed stock, the M1915 steady grip, the Nambu 71 round magazine, lengthened, fabric grip, tight grip, and quick as your perks. Now, finally, as our sort of unrealistic but still statistically fast TTK builds, we're closing with the Cooper, which on Caldera at 300 HP has 752 milliseconds that can drop down to 795 milliseconds, that being at 23.4 meters, but after that, this is kind of where we talk about the prime example of the damage fall off. If you're not hitting your shots, you can go from at that 23.4 meter range, 795 milliseconds, all the way down to a 1.02 second TTK, over 1,000 millisecond TTK. One of, if not the steepest drops from where you land your shots here with it. Same thing goes for Rebirth at 250 HP, 636 milliseconds, outwards of 680, but again, if you drop off without that accuracy, nearly 200 milliseconds in a steep drop off at distance at 23.4 plus meters. For this though, if you're interested, recoil booster, Gracie rapid barrel, slate reflector, Cooper 45 RS stock, hand stop, 60 round drum mag, lengthened, polymer grip, hard scope, and then fully loaded. But now we can get over into the realistic time to kill weapons. The weapons that are viable, they're easy to control, they're meta weapons, so we definitely will see a little bit of crossover here with this, but weapons that can absolutely be used in long range, close range, doesn't matter. So for this, I want to start out with the QBZ. Statistically speaking, in terms of rifles, it's the third fastest TTK we'll see here in this sort of top 5. We're actually going to do 6 for what it's worth, but I want to talk about this one first because I think of the rifles here and the long range play, it's going to be the easiest to use. The QBZ on Caldera, 300 HP, the best TTK you can end up getting is 795 milliseconds with a drop-off consistently until 46 meters, at which point you'll end up having a best-case scenario of 834 milliseconds. You can see a steep drop-off at that point where, depending on shot placement, you could drop down to a 922 millisecond, so make sure you hit your shots. For Rebirth, again, 250 HP, best case, 619 milliseconds, but you can see that consistently drop until 46 meters. Again, pretty solid of a distance, only dropping you to 657 milliseconds, best case. Commendable, especially for a build that's so easy to control. Admittedly, this one actually kind of surprised me, because with the recent buffs to the XM4 headshots and that feeling of the two, they seem similar, but I mean, this actually kind of blows the XM4 out of the water. It's a difference of like 35 to 40 milliseconds, but it's substantial. So the QBC, I'd absolutely take over the XM4. For this, I'd run the Agency Suppressor, Task Force Barrel, Field Agent Grip, the 60 round Drum Mag, and the Axial Arms 3x Optic. Now, the next weapon, the one that is statistically speaking the best rifle for long range here at this, is the CR56 AMAX, another Modern Warfare powerhouse that is a little bit harder to control than the QBZ. The recoil is definitely way more noticeable and takes a little bit more skill to land your shots, especially at a distance, but you can end up at 300 HP getting a TTK of 762 milliseconds, and it will retain that sub 800 millisecond range outwards of 36 meters. So then it only drops to sub 900s. So it's still relatively manageable, but if you can end up staying within that medium range engagements, it's definitely nice on Caldera. For Rebirth, 667 milliseconds will be your best case scenario, and it will retain a sub 700 millisecond TTK outwards of 35 meters. For this build, I'd recommend the VLK 3x optic, the monolithic suppressor, the XRK Zodiac barrel, the 45 round magazine, and the Commando foregrip. Surprisingly, the next best weapon here in terms of TTK is another Modern Warfare weapon. Not a rifle this time, but instead an LMG. For those that loved the Bruin meta back in the day, it's still pretty viable, especially in TTK standards. On Caldera, you can end up getting 768 milliseconds with a consistent drop-off until 37 meters, at which point you'll see 805 milliseconds as a TTK, but then a damage drop-off brings it to still sub 900 millisecond potential. This is honestly still super competitive, but you'll notice that the TTK compared to the AMAX over distance drops off a bit more harshly. The flip side, though, being that you have 15 more rounds per magazine, so do with that what you will. For Rebirth, you'll end up getting a fastest TTK potential of 688 milliseconds with a consistent drop-off to 37 meters, where it's still 725 milliseconds, and then will consistently drop off further. For this, I'd recommend the XRK Summit 26.8 barrel, the monolithic suppressor, the VLK 3x optic, the TAC laser, and the 60 round magazine. After that, I'd end up recommending rounding out our ranged weapons here with this, the STG-44. Now, the STG is consistent beyond belief here, it seems. It's kind of surprising, actually. I wasn't really expecting it to be as highly placed as it is, but for the STG, you can get a base TTK of 800 milliseconds with the 60-round magazine. Still slightly edging out that XM4, just falling barely behind the QBZ, but for this, you'll want to make sure that you use that 60-round magazine. The TTK is slightly different here, slightly slower with the 50-round, even though it is easier to control in terms of the recoil. But the nice part is with that 60-round magazine, you can end up keeping a TTK of outwards of 46 meters at still 841 milliseconds, which at that point, yes, you could see a steeper drop-off to a 940 millisecond, but it's honestly pretty crazy how consistent that is at such a long distance. For Rebirth, you'll end up having a 600 millisecond retaining a sub 650 millisecond TTK until 46 meters, but again, really solid drop-off in terms of distance. Rebirth-wise, though, it's kind of weird because it's actually probably your best choice for a rifle in Rebirth play, so bear that in mind. For that, though, I'd recommend the MX silencer, the VDD 760mm barrel. The 2.5 times optic is what I've been running. You'll notice more visual bounce here if you run the 3 to 6 times optic, so it comes down to preference. The weighted stock, the hand stop underbarrel, the 8mm Kurz 60-round drum magazine, that's what makes this build lengthened, polymer grip, focused, and fully loaded. Now, outside of the rifle play, we're going to talk about, I know this would be normally number 10, we're going to go to 10 and 11 because they're really close in terms of some of the viability here of them, and honestly, it feels weird only talking about one SMG, but firstly, the MP40 with the short barrel build. This, on Caldera, you can achieve a 645 millisecond TTK with a drop-off to potentially 833 milliseconds at only 11 meters, but then a gradual decline staying sub 900 milliseconds until 30 meters, so you'll definitely want to make sure that you use this in close quarters, but you can still kind of get the job done here if needed. Rebirth, you'll end up seeing that TTK at 484 milliseconds with an initial drop-off down to 510 milliseconds best case at 11 meters, but you could also see that drop down to 671 milliseconds at 11 meters if you're not incredibly accurate. For this, though, I'd recommend the recoil booster, the VDD short barrel, the Krosnick ISO 1M is my preferred optic of choice, just the iron sight variant here with that, the folding stock, the pistol grip, the Grenko 45 round magazine, lengthened, polymer grip, unmarked, and quick. And as a little bonus here again, number 11, because it is such a close call with SMG and close range play, that being the Owen gun, a preferred weapon of choice for a lot of players because it does have a pretty quick TTK potential. It's relatively mobile, it's easy to control, but with this on Caldera at 300 HP, you can end up getting a fastest TTK of 705 milliseconds, outwards of 13.6 meters, where you'll be met with a 743 millisecond TTK. But again, we'll see some steep drop-offs with this weapon, because if you're not accurate, you can end up getting a 920 millisecond TTK at that 13.6 meter range, and if you're challenging anything at range, we can drop down to a whole 1.28 second TTK at 16.8 meters now. So not your best bet outside of close quarters. For Rebirth, you're met with the same problems. The fastest TTK you can get 617 milliseconds, outwards of 13.6 meters, but again, you'll be over 1 second in TTK at 16.8 meters. So make sure you're challenging close quarters gunfights with this. For the Owen gun, though, the recoil booster, rapid barrel, slate reflector, remove stock, hand stop, the Gorenko 72 round magazine, lengthened, fabric grip, acrobatic, and quick. Those are your best options here for those builds. But that rounds out the top 10, or rather 11 fastest TTK weapons here for both statistical basis and also usable basis. So let me know your thoughts down below. Are you guys using any of these? Anything that, even if they may not statistically be the best, anything you're having fun with? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts below. But if you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing running all things Warzone, Modern Warfare 2 content, and anything COD related here up on the channel. That said, thanks so much for watching. My name's been Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.